Okay, this presentation is an extension or a corollary of the exclusion criterion of property, intellectual property, how it applies to IP. So we're going to use the criterion to analyze both the positive and normative, normative application of the criterion on intellectual property itself, which is one of the quote unquote tougher things to analyze. And so I'm going to compare and contrast this with Austrian criticism of intellectual property, when their criticism is relying on calling all theft is wrong, but it has a lot of shortcomings, including what one should do in a free market in relation to IP if there's no laws supporting it or subsidizing it. Okay, so let's begin. So egotism says that property is determined at any point in time in any hypothetical, real or contrived, by the exclusion criterion. That is to say an object is the property of a meta-self, in all intents and purposes a person, if and only if it can exclude any other meta-self from the object, right? So you can do an empirical test to see if an observational test to see if an object belongs to somebody by looking at his ability, not necessarily his ability, but just the fact that everyone else is excluded from the object but him. Not but him, but so when you look at the set of the meta self, and that's the one you're considering if he owns it or not. You look at the complement of this meta self, which is another conceptual set, and see if they're excluded from it. And if that complementary meta self set is excluded from that property, then by definition that meta self owns it. So you see, the meta self doesn't necessarily need to use it at all, just that the complement of this meta self is excluded from it. And it doesn't matter if it's due to his own that meta self's ability, or by even the ability of that complementary set excluding itself from it, right? So this is relevant when you're talking about society, right? Even this principle applies even in a statist context. The fact that they subsidize property rights, right? The fact that they defend your property rights, so they artificially lower the costs of exclusion by taking it on by themselves. So some people will be net beneficiaries. Some people will be, it's essentially some type of transfer where it's not proportional to the production value. And that's what makes it immoral in egotism's perspective. And this what makes a system like property rights unstable in the long run. It cannot be sustained because it's not profitable. It doesn't care about distributing property efficiently. Now the difference is in a free market. I think I wrote something about it. Let me continue. So okay, again, that is to say, an object is the property of a meta self if and only if it can exclude any other, not it, but if the complementary meta self is excluded from the object. Okay, I didn't mean to imply that if it's due to the meta self excluding the others. Just the net force of exclusion is there. Doesn't matter who's providing the exclusion, just that it's there, either from the meta self himself or the rest of, or any other acting party, or a combination of both. Okay, so this ensures that the cost of exclusion is completely the burden of the owner, right? All the costs of owning something is on the owner. Therefore, it creates the need to utilize the good well enough to at least cover the expense of exclusion. So you see here, the evolutionary profit here is maintained. It's needed in order to maintain property, right? It needs to be quote unquote meta self profitable, or else it starts to erode the existence of the meta self. And this is the ultimate morality here, right? And I claim, like a society, so in a society, this doesn't preclude like some type of eminent domain. When the interests build up so high that it makes sense to transfer the property by force, by aggression if necessary, and it's still moral. I contend, right? And this is, I mean, if you put yourself now, again, egotism says that one should never evaluate morality from any other perspective than the actors, right? So whoever's providing the exclusion, it must be analyzed from their perspective because they're the one actually acting, providing the exclusion. So in order to evaluate morality, it must do so from the cost-benefit analysis from that Metaself who's acting, who's providing the exclusion. Because it doesn't make sense for a body like even government or let's say an ANCAP, the Rothbard ANCAP society, for some institution to protect property rights when it's not ultimately profitable for the one that's providing those rights. And in the end, if it isn't Metaself profitable, that entity will go extinct, and it can't be, that property can't be maintained if that was the critical provision, right? If the Metaself couldn't do it himself and this body was protecting it artificially and it's not Metaself profitable, it'll erode itself away, all things equal. And then the guy will cease to have it in the whoever it was protecting the property for will cease to have it in the long run. And it's just not, it doesn't make any sense to pursue something that's not sustainable unless it's just a temporary means to a greater end. So this rule of somehow making sure that the costs are proportional to the benefits, right, is consistent with sustainability and mutually beneficial gain once the goods produced with the property, if it's a capital good, is traded into the marketplace. Also, any transfer of ownership, even through theft or seizure, which is not precluded in a free market society, or in any hypothetical, of course, but in particular a free market society, but all costs of doing so, transfer of ownership and exclusion afterwards, must be distributed proportionally to those who seek to benefit from it. So you see here, it creates an incentive for society to help someone defend something. For instance, if someone produces goods and trades them into the market, it's every free market anarchist agrees it's mutually beneficial. Now that profit on both sides, the consumer and producer surplus in this case, is incentive for both parties to provide exclusion, not rights, exclusion services to whoever's utilizing that capital at the moment. And the thing is, it becomes a game, right? If someone's underutilizing a property and someone else can utilize it better, there's no reason why society will keep supporting if that other guy, nor should the other guy be mad if it's taken away from him, because ultimately he doesn't consume the goods he produces, and by transferring the capital good to the one who utilizes it better, the guy that they're taking it from, even though he may not see it, benefits more through a higher standard of living. He really doesn't care about the capital goods he produces. He cares about ultimately his buying power. And so this is ultimately moral in the case. And so in some instances, a person who currently tries to defend a property when society needs it more, right, doesn't see that he's even a net beneficiary. So even so in this case, like in this hypothetical, aggressing against him benefits not only the rest of society but him in the long run, and he just doesn't see it. But the difference is, now nappers, calm down, but the difference is all the costs are the burden of the people who are going to transfer it and exclude from there, right? And in the case of government, they spend other people's money, and the incentive is skewed, is perverted, and that's what makes that immoral. But in a free market, when this happens, people take their own risk with their own money doing so by stealing and damaging somewhat of their reputation if that's somewhat of a threat in the future. But if everyone sees that they're doing it for the utilitarian good, it's somewhat moral from their perspective. But again, we have to evaluate all action from any action that's done from the actor's perspective, from his metaself's perspective, how it benefits his metaself, right? So, okay, all rivalrous property, intellectual or not, will be allocated based on productivity. So rivalrous property is that no two people or a finite amount of people, I don't know what the strong definition is, but a finite amount of people are allowed to utilize it at once. And so, now the thing is, you can define intellectual property specific enough that it becomes rivalrous, right? So this is one of the cases where Austrians will say intellectual property is non-rivalrous. Well, again, just like the definition of monopoly, it's arbitrary. You can arbitrarily define it so specifically that it becomes rivalrous, right? Like my idea is my idea, and no one else but me can use it. It's by definition rivalrous. The cost of exclusion is very low because it's very hard to, yeah, how's anyone else? I mean, it's very expensive for anyone to access one of my thoughts, right? You could torture me. You could, I mean, in the future, I mean, you could develop a technology that reads my brain from a distance, but the cost of doing so is astronomically high, right? So you see, there's natural costs and benefits to everything, and this is the ultimate morality here. nature provides the units for measurement of morality in terms of existence units or whatever. I haven't developed that yet because it's a very abstract thing, but you can compare existence units in terms of other existence units, right? But I won't get into that here. Anyways, the good of intellectual property comes from discovering a concept, technology, which in turn lowers the cost of production or raise the value per unit of a good or service, right? So you could either, a good technology that's a good can either lower the cost of production and maintain the quality of the product, or raise the quality of the product and produce the same amount of units at the same, or a combination of both, right? But in turn, a strong rule is that it creates good net, it raises the standard of living for society, right? Once a technology is discovered and disseminated, even with the mere sale of a good that utilizes the technology, it becomes exponentially costly to exclude others from it. So this high cost makes it unlikely for a person to both utilize a technology for profit and simultaneously exclude others from imitating the technology in the form of a competing good, right? So you can't prevent reverse engineering when it's not illegal, right? So when it's not artificially illegal, when when government's foolishly spending money to pay for justice services and court services to enforce these expensive actions, right? It becomes very hard to maintain a monopoly on a disseminated idea, and this is the natural case. This is the natural law in a free market here. There's no artificial rights here. I'm never going to invoke the use of rights. Now, nature provides. Now, it doesn't preclude the possibility of a technology where someone can utilize this technology to somehow, the good of exclusion, the act of exclusion might become infinitely easier. I don't know. It doesn't seem like it'll outpace information cheapness, and so okay. So one can make a case that in the future you can create an exclusion device, let's say, for ideas. Somehow it makes it infinitely cheap to exclude others. But the thing is, it's competing directly with dissemination of information, and I think that one increases at a faster rate. So ultimately, I mean, I haven't explored this. I just played around with it while I was writing, played around with the idea, writing the article. But you can see my intuition where the cheapness of information increases at a faster rate than the technology to exclude others from it. It just makes sense. It just makes sense, especially like if it grows exponentially. If you tell two people, they tell two people, it becomes, how are you going to contain that? Once someone even sees the good and gets inspired by it, Or how are you even going to stop independent discovery, right? Again, egotism says that all concepts and technologies already exist. People only discover them. So it doesn't stop people from independently discovering a technology. Okay, so my argument relies on the assumption that government does things less efficient, a negative economic profit, right? Because it's not since it's not a meta-self interested entity, and the interests of meta-selves are never perfectly aligned. So when it tries to spend someone else's money for their own good, it creates an inefficiency. First off, number one, you have to admit there's a frictional transfer first that has to occur from the producer to the spender, and then it must be spent for the producer's benefit. There's a frictional loss here, right? And just from the transfer alone, not to mention that the interests are never aligned. Even if, let's say, the spender is somewhat and more enlightened in some way, it doesn't matter. It has to so in the enlightenment case, it can be argued both ways, and there's no valid reason why the government spender is more enlightened than the one who's more aware of his circumstances. So that's a wash. But the problem is the interests are never aligned, and that one is another tiebreaker. Not only there's frictional loss, but the meta self interest is never aligned perfectly, and therefore it'll be spent inefficiently, right? So sometimes when you spend other people's money, like when you're a kid in your parents' house, you don't care about leaving the lights on. And so it goes to this phenomenon of being cost conscious. When you're not suffering the burden of the cost directly, and it's people tend to spend more frivolously, just like a voter, right? I mean, I talk to people about them, and they talk about, oh, government should do this, government should do that. Government should build a border, government should build a wall, government should protect property rights. It's because they talk a lot of bull crap because they don't consider the costs. When you ask them about the measures they support, right, whether it be freedom or national defense or what, and you ask them, okay, what's the cost and benefits due to this policy? They can't tell you. They only focus on benefits most of the time. They only present their argument from a benefit side, never from a net result of both. And that's a stupid thing to do. And this is what happens in government. When voters lose sense of cost, they lose a sense of morality, and they lose a sense of their ultimate goal, right? So people tend to talk about protecting rights and stuff, and this comes at a cost too. And I contend that society should not protect everyone's quote-unquote rights, right? I believe there will be privileges handed out, but it will be handed out proportionally to production. How much the citizen is of value to the rest of society. And this is the rational morality here. And this is always going to be rational, right? Everything else is irrational with respect to this, as I contend. So my argument relies that the government does things less efficient, negative economic profit, right? It's not economic profit. That means there exists an alternative that's more profitable, since it's not meta-self interested. And interests of meta-selves are never perfectly aligned. And government taxation and monopoly creates further deadweight loss, right? So monopoly, again, the government monopoly in particular, not a free market monopoly. Free market monopoly has to gain market share by competing through providing better goods at cheaper services at a greater quantity. Government does the opposite because it restricts competition. So it's an artificial monopoly. And if it was profitable in the first place to provide this good, whatever it be, a public good even, then then some entrepreneur would have done it. It would have provided incentive. The fact that government has to come in and do it on someone else's dime shows that this good should never have been brought to market in the first place. Even externalities are accounted for with the profit incentive itself. As maybe I'll get into a debate with someone else in the future, like tenuous or something, tenuous theories. So again, there's deadweight loss due to taxation. There's deadweight loss due to frictional transfer. There's deadweight loss due to monopoly. There's deadweight loss due to not perfectly aligned objectives, especially when you have one meta-self acting for another. So it may generate profit for other meta-selves. So government, may generate profit. So people could, I contend, it's not government's not a Metaself interested entity, and people always come back. Yeah, it is. No, it isn't. Like, it always takes on the loss on itself, right? So and you'll see perpetual budget deficits and perpetual national debts, right? That just keep growing. But so it might transfer things, and certain parties will gain, but it's not the government, right? It's the special interest groups that play the equally proportional democratic game, right? When you have a democracy based on just sheer existence, right? Everyone gets this equal amount of say, and you don't have to participate. You get special interest takeover, and in a free market, it's going to be a democracy, but it's going to be proportional to the value you are to the rest of society, at least in terms of how the society will act with respect to any particular Metaself or component of itself, or even an outsider, right? So it may generate profit for other Metaself special interests, but only does so at its own expense, ensuring its eventual fiscal demise. So again, this has to do with my accelerationist philosophy, right? The best way to freedom is to give government more power, right? We're more than halfway through a linear path forest, and if we want to get out, the quickest way to get out is to keep going. And people don't learn through theory. People learn through collapse, right? When it collapses, they have more data, and you can't bypass this learning for normal people. And also, it has the added benefit of trapping those who believe in government the most, right? So if you give them the opportunity to invest all their life savings in government, and when it collapses, these people will suffer the most. And the people who believe that this is coming will prep for it. And you will get a bottleneck effect. And this is what I contend is beneficial to at least the free market Metaself, right? So since this applies to the good of providing exclusion, then the free market can provide this good more efficiently, creating an economic deadweight loss. And this comes from, again, perfectly aligned Metaself interests. When you spend your money, your interests are perfectly aligned with your Metaself. Not perfectly, but the best. I mean, it's going to be the best as you can get, all things equal, right? You're going to have to make a case that someone's more enlightened. And then if that enlightenment disparity compensates for the fact that it's a different Metaself. Okay, so an axiom of ego-utilitarianism says all concepts exist by default and that humans only discover them. They don't create them, right? So like mathematics and laws of physics, or concepts and or mere concepts like quantity, all these things, and technology included, exist by default. They're just recombinatorials of smaller concepts, right? I mean, so when you accept this, right? When you accept concepts exist by default in the Metaself universe, right? All concepts will eventually be discovered given the fullness of time, right? So in this case, so the thing is, so egotism also says Metaself profitability for the actor is a true measure of morality or what's right, right? Obviously, it's in alignment with evolution. So this comes from the axiom of evolution exists, right? Egotism says property is an object that is excluded from the complement of the owner's Metaself. In other words, the only criterion that determines who owns what is if the prospective owner can exclude others. And again, I'm being redundant here. Plus, I didn't mean to just attribute the act of exclusion to the owner himself. It can be, the act of exclusion can be shared by not only the owner but any other acting Metaself, whether it be by his own means or with help from others. Okay, I said that. When government protects intellectual property, it promotes monopoly profits. So again, there's a deadweight loss when you protect property like this. So you prevent competition, and you have to pay for it, right? That comes at a cost, and and the consumer suffers from it. So which economic analysis shows creates a net deadweight loss that is suffered by the consumer through lower quality and quantity of goods, and also, lower quality. I was going to say less innovation, but I think that's incorporated into the quality, and higher prices, which is greater than the additional revenue gained by the monopoly supplier. Okay, so again, classical economics is very fair because it presents both costs and benefits, right? Not only did I show that the consumer suffers, but I've shown that it's greater than the additional revenue gained by the monopoly supplier, which is the beneficial argument when you talk to the supplier who's getting the monopoly privilege. He's going to argue this and not going to show the loss due to consumer. But a fair economist will show both and show that. And it's shown graphically in Econ 101, right? I mean, as long as you have upward sloping supply curves and downward sloping demand curves, it's that deadweight loss will manifest itself. That shaded area underneath the curves, between the curves. But more importantly, when government protects intellectual property, or any property for that matter, it artificially lowers the cost of exclusion, making it artificially cheaper to own intellectual property. And since government takes on some of these costs of exclusion, by the assumption earlier, it does so inefficiently and creates economic loss, right? In other words, if it were economically profitable to exclude others from a general idea or technology, then the prospective owner would have done so more efficiently in the free market. When government subsidizes an industry by absorbing exclusion costs, it creates another deadweight loss. And as everyone knows from deadweight loss of a subsidy, the result is, even though we have more research and development, it is more than the optimum amount that would have occurred prior to the government intervention. In other words, we have too much research and development. People always worry that we have too little intellectual property or pursuit of intellectual property. The problem is that they are not considering opportunity cost of research and development. One of the axioms of ego-utilitarianism is all concepts and technology exist independently of human awareness of them. The mind only discovers them and does not create them. And given enough time, all possible technology is inevitable. But what is more important is the order in which it's discovered and how much productivity is foregone for this research necessary for discovery. This should be dictated by Metaself profit, right? So in essence, technology is in essence a capital good, an intellectual capital good, right? You have to invest upfront in research and development and not get any benefits in the meantime. Now the thing is, there's a most efficient path to this, right? Sometimes it's best to put off research and development and actually produce in the meantime. So every time someone allocates their time toward research and development, it necessarily means that labor wasn't used elsewhere, right, for some other reason. And this skew in profit distorts the market and creates, a ripple effect in deadweight loss. Okay, so those are the opportunity costs with R&D. I mean, just the fact that you don't research, and the fact that you can have too much. I mean, people with patents and stuff, you have people spending all their day trying to invent stupid stuff. I mean, if this wasn't protected, they'd be more careful, right? I mean, the fact that the exclusion costs are zero now, just the fact that you file a patent and it's protected for you. Now people are inventing really stupid stuff. I mean, that's not to say that some useful things don't come out of it, but again, you have to present both things. What would happen in a free market? I mean, a lot less useless stuff would come out of this stuff, and that labor would necessarily be reallocated where it's more profitable. And over the long run, I mean, a capital outlay that pays itself off in 10 years that the government undertakes, in the free market, it could have doubled that money instead of just paying itself off. So in essence, sometimes people make the case that a government outlay in a very capital intensive technology, takes years just to pay off, but it pays off in the future. The problem is, in the free market would have done so more efficiently. It would have actually probably, if it's that capital intensive, that means there's other technologies there that should be in between that. There's intermediate steps you're skipping, right? I mean, it's like you're jumping too far if it's too capital intensive. There should be an intermediate technology there that makes it more efficient to reach that more capital intensive point. I don't know. That's just a theory, but it's a very likely possibility that the fact that something's capital intensive, that probably implies there's another technology in there that could be fit in there, that's a lower hanging fruit, that if you were to allocate resources, and there's no mechanism that government doesn't care about profit mechanisms, right? It doesn't care about making a profit. And all it cares about is satisfying goals for special interests. And that's what makes it net debit loss for society. And if taxpayers don't feel like they're getting value, they're going to leave. The problem is, in today's society, government spends money, most of its money, not through tax revenue, but through borrowing. And now people have lost sight of, they think they're getting more than they pay for. And actually we are. I mean, because other countries, it's not a closed system. Other countries are, but that's beside the point. So anyways, an investment may have such high opportunity costs, capital investment, capital outlay, that you could have had both if taken in the right order. So just like, so flippers, resellers, they know how important working capital is. You can't keep capital tied up somewhere, because you could turn it over several times and have a better result than if you were to try to get maximum dollar of reselling things by holding on to it a little longer, right? So a nickel now is worth more than a dime later in some instances. So innovation concept, the efficiencies in order. Okay, so again, I talked about that. If something's so capital intensive, that implies there could be an intermediate technology there that should be pursued over that capital intensive goal. And if it were really truly profitable, even in the long run, this presents the incentive for the market to come in and do so efficiently. The fact that government comes in and does so for someone else creates a perversion, right? So in one case, government may provide a benefit for a special interest group, and someone may point that out. But in the difference is, in the free market, not only does whoever, like the consumers, probably a special interest group in the free market, not only does that the consumer benefit, right, who receives the good that's produced, as in the case in the government when it produces the capital good, but also the producer makes a profit. So it's mutually. So you see, there's two sides to profit here, and in government there's only one, right? The special interest group, while government takes on the loss, and that's the true difference in morality in these two cases. Oh, okay, so now let me move on to rights theory and the Austrian school, and my criticism of the Austrian school using rights to explain this, because rights fall short, right? Once you establish that, okay, rivalrous good doesn't deprive, by definition, a non-rivalrous good, like a generally defined intellectual idea, is not rivalrous, because producing another one, like someone copying you, doesn't deprive you of using the idea yourself. Therefore, it's not rivalrous. Therefore, it's not theft. Okay, now what? So it's not theft. Therefore, it's not wrong. Therefore, what? You're not going to make laws to support it? It doesn't show what, if there exists a situation where it's profitable to actually try to do so. I mean, I'm not precluding, until technology is somewhat perfect, there can be cases where someone for some short period of time can exclude others from an idea, and in effect it becomes his by definition, under the Criterion principle, it's his property. Okay, so and you can't stop, in a free market you can't stop reverse engineering, right? When you look at like the Chinese reverse engineering, this is inferior reverse engineering. The fact that more productive, the smartest, most productive engineers, the ones who probably have the most talent to reverse engineer, don't do so because they have too much opportunity cost by not breaking the law, right? And so when you release this, it's not going to be like crappy Chinese copying. It's going to be full blown perfect copying. I mean, it's going to be as good or better than the original. Probably there's probably going to be improvements made on them. So this is going to be the case in a free market, and so it's very hard to prevent this thing. Exponentially costly, especially once it's disseminated. with mediums like the internet, or even decentralized forms of communication. So anyways, okay. Okay, so this has some consequences in relation to my reputation theory as justice, right? So this applies to your reputation too. Your reputation is intellectual property. So you don't have, it is very hard to protect your own reputation. So you don't have a right to your own reputation. Everything about you is open, should be open for everyone to inspect, and it's just. Now, we're so used to having our privacy, you know, because it's artificially subsidized. Privacy is artificially subsidized. Privacy is just protection, artificial, it's IP for your reputation. And if you truly are against IP, if you think that it's not sustainable, or if you think, even if you're a stupid Austrian who thinks it's not right to protect it just because it's not theft, right? You're gonna have to come to you're gonna have to admit then you have no right to privacy. And I'm willing to admit this. And actually, there I find a use in this in justice, right? And I talk about this in one of my videos. Reputation as the ultimate form of justice, right? Forget DROs, but open reputation where you don't have control of what people say of you. There's going to be an evolving information page about you that contains probably everything about you, from your criminal history to your grade school grades. It's going to be that intrusive, and this is the ultimate. This is the ultimate. This is the ultimate justice. This is the fault. This is default justice. Right after self-defense or community defense. This is the ground. This is the foundation of the justice system in a free market. And you can watch my video, and I'll get into that there. But I think I've talked long enough. Thanks for watching. Comment down below if you have any criticisms. PM me.